The restaurant was the kind of place that seemed to exist in another world, its shimmering chandeliers casting a soft golden glow over pristine white tablecloths, and the quiet hum of conversation punctuated by the occasional clink of fine crystal. It was a picture of elegance, designed to impress anyone who stepped through its grand double doors. Sam hesitated as he entered, the heavy doors closing behind him. He glanced around, taking in the room's air of exclusivity. The patrons, dressed in designer suits and flowing gowns, sat in small groups, laughing softly over expensive meals that were plated like works of art. In stark contrast to their polished appearance, Sam wore a simple flannel shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed work boots. His clothes weren't dirty, but they were clearly out of place here. He stood with a quiet confidence, though he couldn't ignore the weight of the stares that followed him. As he made his way toward the hostess stand, the murmur of voices seemed to dip, and Sam caught snippets of whispered comments. Did he get lost? Who let him in here dressed like that? Sam kept his head high, but he couldn't ignore the heat rising to his cheeks. He wasn't here to make a scene, he had his reasons for coming. But the opulence of the room, paired with the disapproving gazes, made the space feel suffocating. The hostess, a young woman with immaculate makeup and a sleek black uniform, glanced up as Sam approached. Her eyes flicked over him quickly, her smile tight and rehearsed. She straightened her posture as though she were bracing herself for an awkward exchange. "Good evening," she said, her tone polite but clipped. "Do you have a reservation?" Sam nodded. "Yes, I do. Sam Green, I believe it was made for tonight." The hostess tapped a few keys on her screen, her manicured nails clicking sharply. When she found his name, her brows furrowed slightly, and she glanced at him again, her forced smile faltering. "Mr. Green," she began, her voice soft but laced with an edge, "I'm sorry, but we have a strict dress code here. I'm afraid I can't seat you dressed like this." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment Sam felt the stares behind him grow even heavier. He took a breath, steadying himself, and nodded, choosing to say nothing in return. The humiliation was sharp, but he refused to let it show. Without another word, Sam turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. Behind him, the hostess and a few patrons exchanged glances, their expressions tinged with amusement and superiority. What none of them realized, as they resumed their conversations and laughter, was that Sam would be back. And this time, things would be very different. The hostess's smile wavered as she looked at Sam again, her eyes flicking briefly to the flannel shirt and worn jeans that set him apart from the finely dressed crowd. Her voice, polite on the surface, carried an undertone of condescension. "I'm sorry, Mr. Green, but as I mentioned, we have a strict dress code here. Jackets, dress shirts, and formal shoes are required," she said, her gaze dropping pointedly to his scuffed boots. "It's a standard we uphold for the comfort of all our guests." Sam shifted slightly, feeling the weight of her judgment and the murmurs from nearby tables. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "I understand, but I'm here for a special occasion. This reservation was important." The hostess's smile tightened, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it is, sir," she interrupted, her tone icy. "But we have to maintain a certain image here. I'm afraid we simply can't make exceptions." The words stung, sharper than Sam expected. He glanced around the room, catching glimpses of well-dressed diners sneaking quick glances in his direction, their smirks and raised eyebrows impossible to ignore. For a moment, Sam thought about arguing, about explaining why this dinner mattered so much to him. But he stopped himself. He had always been taught that dignity wasn't about what others thought of you. It was about how you carried yourself, even in moments like this. With a slight nod, Sam replied, "I see. Thank you for your time." He turned and walked toward the exit, each step feeling heavier than the last. He didn't look back, but he could hear the low hum of voices behind him, the faint chuckles and whispers that made the sting of humiliation even worse. Outside, the cool night air hit him, a stark contrast to the warmth of the restaurant. Sam stood for a moment, breathing deeply and shaking off the bitterness that clung to him. He looked down at his clothes, then out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, not in anger, but with quiet resolve. He wasn't angry at the dress code or even at the hostess. What bothered him was how quickly they dismissed him, how easily they judged someone based on appearances. They didn't know who he was or why he was there, and yet, they had decided he didn't belong. But soon, they'd see how wrong they were. Sam had a plan, and this time he'd make sure they remembered him. As Sam walked away from the restaurant, the humiliation still fresh in his mind, his thoughts drifted to the journey that had brought him here. He had grown up in a small town, in a house where the walls were thin and the winters were cold. Money was always tight, and luxury wasn't something his family could even imagine, let alone afford. Sam remembered watching his parents work tirelessly just to make ends meet. His father juggled odd jobs, his hands always rough and calloused, while his mother took in sewing projects late into the night. They didn't have much, but they had dignity, and they had taught Sam to value people, not possessions. Those lessons stayed with him as he got older. Sam worked hard, juggling school and part-time jobs, slowly carving out a path for himself. After years of late nights, failed attempts, and learning from his mistakes, he built a successful construction company from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it gave him everything he had once dreamed of. But wealth had never changed Sam. While others flaunted expensive cars or designer suits, he found comfort in staying grounded. He lived modestly, not because he couldn't afford more, but because he believed that how you treated people mattered more than how you looked. Moments like this reminded him why he stayed that way. Watching the hostess dismiss him so quickly, seeing the judgment in her eyes, brought back memories of the times he'd been overlooked, simply because he didn't look the part. Sam clenched his jaw as he thought about it, but not out of anger. He wasn't bitter. He had faced too much in life to let moments like these pull him down. Instead, he felt a quiet determination building inside him. This wasn't about proving his wealth or teaching anyone a lesson. It was about standing firm in who he was and showing that appearances could be deceiving. Respect shouldn't be something you earned by wearing the right clothes or driving the right car. It should be given freely, without judgment. As Sam got into his truck, his reflection stared back at him in the rearview mirror. His flannel shirt, his boots, the lines on his face, they told his story better than any expensive suit ever could. He smiled faintly to himself and whispered, "They'll see soon enough. Not for me, but for the next person they try to turn away." And with that, Sam started his engine, a plan already forming in his mind. Tomorrow, he'd return. Not to prove his worth, but to remind them that everyone deserves kindness, no matter what they're wearing. The next evening, the restaurant was just as lively as before. The same elegant glow spilled out from the windows, and the air around the entrance buzzed with conversation. Well-dressed patrons arrived in sleek cars, stepping out with the practiced ease of people accustomed to luxury. Among them, a gleaming black luxury car pulled up to the valet. The engine purred softly before coming to a stop. Heads turned as the driver's door opened, and out stepped Sam. Except this time, he was nearly unrecognizable. Gone was the flannel shirt and faded jeans. Instead, Sam wore a perfectly tailored suit, deep charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that caught the light. His crisp white shirt and silk tie completed the look, and a polished pair of leather shoes finished it off. Every detail was impeccable, exuding quiet sophistication. Sam adjusted his cuffs casually, as if he dressed like this every day. His broad shoulders and confident stance made him look like someone who belonged, not just in the restaurant, but in any room he walked into. The valet approached quickly, offering a deferential smile. "Good evening, sir," he said, opening the passenger door with practiced precision. Sam handed over the keys with a polite nod. "Take good care of it," he said, his voice calm but commanding. As he walked toward the entrance, the stares followed him, but this time they weren't filled with judgment. Instead, they were admiring, even envious. The glances from passers-by and the restaurant's patrons spoke volumes. This man was someone important. The hostess, standing at her station near the door, barely glanced up at first. But as Sam approached, her eyes widened slightly, taking in his polished appearance. She straightened her posture and greeted him with a warm, almost eager smile. "Good evening, sir," she said, her tone now dripping with respect. "Do you have a reservation tonight?" Sam gave her a small smile. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice steady but unreadable. As she looked up his name, she didn't recognize him. How could she? The man before her seemed like a completely different person from the one she had dismissed so casually the night before. Outside, the luxury car sat gleaming under the restaurant's lights, and inside, Sam prepared to make his presence felt in a way they wouldn't soon forget. Sam pushed open the restaurant's grand doors with ease, the soft murmur of conversation and clinking glassware welcoming him once again. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. Not because the restaurant had changed, but because he had. Dressed in his tailored suit, Sam moved with a quiet confidence that turned heads. Patrons glanced up from their tables, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. The staff, too, stole quick looks, their professional facades momentarily slipping as they registered his presence. At the hostess stand, the same young woman who had dismissed him the night before stood ready with her polished smile. She glanced up as Sam approached, her practiced charm immediately shifting into something more genuine. "Good evening, sir," she greeted, her tone bright and enthusiastic. "Welcome to La Belle Étoile. Do you have a reservation this evening?" Sam's eyes met hers, calm and composed, but he said nothing about their previous encounter. "Yes, I do," he replied smoothly. "Sam Green." Her fingers danced across the reservation screen, and when she found his name, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. She hesitated for just a moment, as if trying to place where she'd seen the name before, but dismissed it just as quickly. "Of course, Mr. Green," she said, her voice now laced with deference. "We're so pleased to have you with us tonight." She glanced over his suit and nodded approvingly. "Let me personally escort you to one of our best tables." Sam nodded slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'd appreciate that," he said, his tone neutral but firm. As he followed the hostess through the restaurant, the heads that turned weren't filled with judgment this time. They were filled with curiosity, admiration, and perhaps a hint of envy. The very same people who had glanced at him dismissively the day before now looked at him as though he belonged, as though he were someone to be respected. The hostess led him to a table near the center of the room, where the lighting was perfect, and the ambiance was carefully curated for the most important guests. She gestured to the chair with a flourish, her smile unwavering. "If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask," she said. Sam sat down, his movements deliberate and composed. He looked around the room, taking in the elegance and the faces of the diners, many of whom were still glancing his way. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady. He didn't mention the night before, didn't point out the irony of her politeness now. There was no need. This was just the beginning. As the hostess walked away, Sam leaned back in his chair, his faint smile returning. The stage was set, and soon enough, they would all understand the truth behind the man they thought they knew. The first course arrived with the kind of presentation you'd expect from a 5-star restaurant, delicate, artistic, and meticulously arranged. Sam thanked the server with a polite nod and began eating, his movements measured and calm, savoring each bite. He wasn't in a hurry. This moment was about more than the meal. It was about timing. As he lifted his glass to take a sip of water, a figure approached his table. The restaurant's manager, a sharply dressed man with a practiced smile, walked up with an air of importance. "Mr. Green," the manager began, his tone warm and accommodating, "it's an honor to have you dining with us tonight. I trust everything is to your satisfaction?" Sam set down his glass and looked up, his expression unreadable but polite. "So far, it's been lovely," he replied. The manager clasped his hands together, clearly pleased. "We strive to provide an unforgettable experience for our esteemed guests," he said. "Please don't hesitate to let us know if there's anything at all we can do for you." Sam tilted his head slightly, his eyes steady as he looked at the man. "It's funny," he said casually, his voice calm and even. "This wasn't the experience I had when I visited yesterday." The manager blinked, his smile faltering for just a second. "Yesterday, sir?" Sam nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Yes. I stopped by, same time, same reservation. Only difference was what I was wearing." The manager's face froze for a moment, his professional composure clearly shaken. He glanced toward the hostess stand, where the young woman stood watching the exchange, her expression slowly turning pale as she realized what was happening. Sam continued, his tone unwavering but not unkind. "I wasn't dressed like this, just a regular shirt and jeans. Your hostess told me there was a dress code, that I didn't fit the image of this establishment." The words hung in the air, and the manager's polite mask cracked completely. His face flushed as he stammered. I deeply apologize, Mr. Green. That's not how there must have been some misunderstanding." Sam raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor sharpening the weight of his words. "No misunderstanding," he said. "She made it very clear I wasn't welcome." The hostess, unable to avoid the manager's pointed glance, hesitated before walking over, her forced smile trembling. "Mr. Green," she began, her voice shaky, I didn't realize. Sam held up a hand, cutting her off without raising his voice. "It's all right. I'm not here to cause a scene." He paused, letting the moment settle. Around him, a few nearby tables had grown quieter, diners subtly listening in. "I just wanted to make a point," Sam continued. "Respect isn't something you should base on appearances. It's not about suits or shoes or the size of someone's wallet. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and dignity, no matter how they're dressed." The manager nodded quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "You're absolutely right, sir. I can't express how sorry I am for the way you were treated. It's unacceptable, and I'll be addressing it immediately." The hostess looked down, unable to meet Sam's eyes. Sam offered a faint smile, his voice softening. "I appreciate that, but remember, it's not about me. Next time someone walks through those doors, don't judge them by what they're wearing. You might not know their story." The manager and hostess nodded, both too stunned to say much more. Sam returned to his meal, calmly continuing as though nothing had happened, leaving the staff to reflect on the lesson they had just learned. As the manager and hostess stood by, unsure of what to say, Sam set down his fork and dabbed at his mouth with the crisp linen napkin. He looked up at them, his expression calm yet thoughtful, his voice steady as he spoke. "Let me tell you something I've learned," he began, his tone quiet but carrying through the room. "Life has a funny way of humbling you. I didn't grow up with much, not fancy suits, not expensive meals, just a family that worked hard and taught me to value people for who they are, not for what they look like." The hostess glanced down, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, while the manager shifted uncomfortably but kept listening. Around the restaurant, the subtle clink of silverware against plates had all but stopped, as other diners tuned into the unexpected speech. "I understand you have a dress code," Sam continued, gesturing slightly to his suit. "And I respect that, but what I don't respect is when someone is dismissed or judged because they don't fit an image. Respect doesn't cost a thing, but it's worth more than any meal you can serve here." His words hung in the air, weighty but not harsh. He wasn't trying to lecture. He was trying to make them see. "You see, kindness," Sam said, leaning forward slightly. "Kindness is what makes the difference in moments like these. It's what separates a place like this from being just a fancy building with good food. People don't remember how shiny the floors are or how perfect the lighting is. They remember how they were made to feel." The hostess looked up at him then, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. The manager cleared his throat, nodding slowly, his posture less rigid than before. Sam leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping the room. "I didn't come back tonight to embarrass anyone or make a scene. I came back to remind you, and maybe all of us, that respect and humility are what truly matter. Not clothes, not appearances, just treating people like people." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Then, slowly, a murmur of approval began to ripple through the diners. A few nodded in agreement, while others exchanged glances, clearly moved by what they'd just heard. The manager bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Green, I can't thank you enough for your understanding and your wisdom. I assure you, this will never happen again." Sam gave him a faint smile, the edges of his mouth softening. "I believe you," he said simply. With that, he turned his attention back to his meal, leaving the staff and patrons to reflect on what had just transpired. Sam didn't need to say anything more. His message had been heard loud and clear, and it was one they wouldn't soon forget. As the evening wore on, Sam finished his meal at a steady, unhurried pace. The restaurant staff moved with quiet efficiency around him, their earlier unease giving way to a newfound respect. Each dish was served with extra care, and every interaction carried a note of sincerity that hadn't been there before. When the server brought the bill, Sam glanced at it briefly, then reached for his wallet. He placed several crisp bills into the check folder, far more than the meal required, ensuring the staff would feel his gratitude, even after he'd left. As he stood to leave, the manager approached once more, his demeanor humble and genuine. "Thank you for dining with us tonight, Mr. Green," he said softly. "And thank you for the lesson." Sam nodded, his expression kind but composed. "It's not about teaching a lesson," he replied. "It's about making sure the next person who walks in gets treated the way they deserve." The hostess, standing nearby, stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Green, I'm so sorry for how I treated you before. I was wrong to judge you, and I'll never forget what you said tonight." Sam offered her a small smile. "That's all I could ask for," he said. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit. The room seemed to quiet as he moved, the soft murmur of conversation pausing as diners watched him go. Sam carried himself with the same quiet dignity he had the night before, showing no bitterness, no resentment, only grace. Outside, his luxury car waited under the glow of the restaurant's lights. The valet handed him the keys with a respectful nod, and Sam slipped into the driver's seat. As the engine roared to life, he glanced back at the restaurant through the rearview mirror. Inside, the manager and hostess stood together, their expressions thoughtful and contemplative. Around them, the hum of conversation had resumed, but the impact of Sam's presence lingered. The narrator's voice fades in, reflective and steady. In a world that often values appearances over character, Sam reminded us of a simple truth. True worth isn't in what we wear, but in how we treat others. And sometimes, the most important lessons come not from anger or confrontation, but from kindness, humility, and grace. The car drove off into the night, leaving behind more than just an empty table. It left a lasting impression, a quiet but powerful reminder of what truly matters. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it inspired you or made you think about the way we treat others, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a moment to like this video and let us know in the comments what you took away from this story. Your feedback means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more meaningful stories like this one. And if you enjoyed it, make sure to share it with your friends and family. It might just brighten someone's day or spark a conversation about kindness and respect. Together, we can spread positivity and create a community that values compassion over appearances. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.